Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a quick hot take on New York Times columnist Thomas Freidman. New York Times columnist, according to Fox News, dismisses bad stuff with the Uyghurs, says America should be more like China. Ooh, Thomas Freidman overlooked accusations of genocide because China has high-speed trains. If you've ever read any of Thomas Freidman, he has a kind of a long history of doing this kind of thing. He just sort of has random observations, not unlike me. But his seem to ignore big, huge things, like the Uyghurs being murdered by the Chinese government. A former legal opinion published, this is from Fox News, published in the United Kingdom, cited the BBC on Sunday, concluded that there is a very credible case that China is carrying out genocide against the Uyghurs, or Uyghurs, I guess you'd pronounce it, but Freidman feels the communist nation is much better off than the United States anyway. Freidman appeared on CNN's Cuomo Primetime on Monday night to declare that China has luxurious high-speed trains because they don't have to worry about people like former President Donald Trump and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. The Times columnist said the GOP, quote, sold their soul to Trump and essentially claimed the United States would have better methods of transportation if it followed Chinese footsteps. He said, quote, do you know that it takes 4 hours and 18 minutes to take a bullet train from Beijing to Shanghai, and it takes 20 hours to take the train from New York to Chicago, and they're both about the same distance? Freidman told Chris Cuomo, nodding along with his every word in a clip flagged by Mediaite. Mediaite? Yeah, Mediaite. Can you imagine defending China? He goes on. I'll tell you something they weren't thinking about in China this week. They weren't thinking about some knucklehead. They weren't spending the week thinking about a knucklehead who claimed 9/11 didn't happen. They weren't thinking about some guy who was a QAnon shaman, Freidman continued. They were probably thinking about some bad stuff with the Uyghurs and all that. Oh, for sure, but I guarantee you they weren't wasting their time on this nonsense. Well, why don't you move to China, Freidman? I mean, you got the money. Move to China. If it's so great and wonderful, you could drive the train around while I assume, be constantly monitored by the government there. Well, they'll take all your money, and you could work in, I guess, the state Politburo and the state media. Yeah, and you'll crack your knuckles every time you write something wrong that's against the Communist Party. You're going to have to learn Mandarin, I assume, but it's all worth it, right? I mean, why don't you go there? It's just unbelievable that these guys would argue that, but in a way, it makes sense because in the bigger picture, China is just throwing so much money into this country, trying to bribe, I think, media figures, that it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, the New York Times is just rife, in my view, with communist sympathizers at this point. The Chinese Communist Party monitors speech in the nation, but Cuomo and Freidman didn't mention that either. No, they're fine with it, because they feel like they're immune, right? They're part of the protected class, therefore, you're making a big deal about it. Cuomo once famously said, you're not allowed to look at the WikiLeaks release. Only we are, because we're journalists. It's just sad what these guys have become. And anyone who takes them seriously, I got to tell you, man, you're living in a fantasy world. These guys are worse than state-run media. Back in the day, Soviet dissidents used to come to this country, and they sometimes would say, and this was in the 90s, that no one trusted Pravda. They assumed the government was lying to them all the time. And they marveled at the media here being subservient to the government, even though they had the freedom not to be. But it's all about money. It's all these big networks. They're about money, and the money is in promoting whatever the government wants. The money right now is in helping the Democratic Party do everything they want. So why would they challenge that? If they challenge that, anyone who challenged the narrative that the Democrats lay down, they're going to get pushback. They're going to get pushback in the form of phone calls to the network. Maybe you want to back off. Maybe you want to back off. We don't want to have that story now. Look at what happened to a certain guy who owned an island, I'll say. I don't know if we can even say his name anymore. I think you know who I'm talking about. The guy who they say didn't kill himself. That guy. They had a story on him and they killed it. They killed it. Essentially delayed it until it was dead, and that's been captured on tape. The newscaster complaining that she had the story and they wouldn't run it. So that's just the story we know about. That's just the one big story we know about. How about all the little stories? How about all the tiny little news stories? How about your local affiliate getting some news story on a Democrat and then getting the word from, their boss, hey, don't do that story. Someone who's, at a local level, they're not making millions of dollars like Cuomo and Freidman. And they, they're just hanging on and they get the word from their boss, no. It takes a lot to stand up to that. And I don't think a lot of people have those guts. They'd rather just go, okay, I'll do something else. But what the hell did they call Freidman? They had a name for him, like, not like a court jester, but like the king's dictation person, that kind of word for him, like the mouthpiece for the establishment. That's kind of, there's a book on the subject about Thomas Freidman, and it's kind of a boring book, but I have a copy of it somewhere. But just how he kind of, in the view of the author, is an establishment shill. And I think I would agree with that. This, to me, pretty much capstones it for me. It's like, here's Freidman on TV defending China. I mean, it's bad enough Biden seems to do it. Now you got a guy who, it's like, oh, you're complaining about the Uyghur Muslims having their organs harvested. They got high-speed train. I don't think a lot of people in the media class have any kinds of morals anymore. And that's something for me to say, because I always thought, back in the day, they seemed so high and mighty. And now, now that I realize a lot of that is a facade, I can't believe how little they care about anything other than lining their own pocket. It's almost like it's a video game to them. They go and they play it and they get their money and then they go home like, that's not me. That's just what I do. It's kind of like when Kamala Harris talked about calling out Joe Biden at the debate, and she just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed, and then finally said, oh, that was just a debate. Like, words don't matter. I think that's true with a lot of people on television now. The words don't matter to them. They say what they need to say, they get a big pile of money, and they go home. And they assume everybody else would do that too. But they're wrong. Yeah, they're wrong. So, I'm not a huge fan of Fox, but I am very much not a fan of CNN, or Thomas Freidman, or the New York Times.